Greetings, fellow Toastmasters, and welcome to the Disney Toastmaster Podcast. I'm Melissa.
And I'm Kyle. Welcome to the next part of our Nautilus series. Today we discuss part 2, Imagineer Roger Broggie.
This is the second series of our show unraveling the connections between Disney-related topics. Our series titled Nautilus will tie together trains and Disney parks, Walt Disney's first Imagineer Roger Broggie, and Mickey and Minnie's Runaway Railway.
Join me as your Toastmaster as we talk about a creative engineer some say could be the greatest to ever work for Walt Disney, and others called the Dark Prince of Imagineering.
So raise your glass and grease up those gears as we chat about Walt Disney's first Imagineer, Roger Broggie.
Moving on to our topic here.
This is the spirit.
The spirit of it. And I think the spirit of kind of what we're talking about has to do with not only the love of trains that Walt Disney had, but some of the Imagineers that came together and made these things happen. The biggest of which, in my opinion, is Mr. Roger Broggie, who we are going to talk about today. So we're going to explore the life and the impact of Roger Broggie. He is also considered to be Walt Disney's original Imagineer.
That's crazy.
That is crazy.
Well, yeah, because he took something, steam trains were functional that crossed the country, and he put it into a theme park.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of crazy in and of itself.
He was definitely, so when we talk about, Roger Broggie today, we're going to talk about, him being hired on as a precision machinist to co-creating the Carolwood Pacific with
Ward Kimball.
Yep, and Walt Disney, and his influence over the all of Disney's history, honestly. His innovations into things that we love and care about so much, like audio animatronics, and there's a bunch of tributes. He's a Disney legend. He's got a lot of things that we're going to talk about with him. But Roger Broggie is Disney's original Imagineer and just a pretty fascinating person. And I think, is not necessarily one of the Imagineers that everybody will just come off of your tongue. But one, he is considered to be Walt Disney's original Imagineer, so more people should be talking about him. But I think part of the reason that he is maybe overlooked is that he may not be seen as the artist, creative sort of Imagineer.
I don't think I would have recognized the name before doing my research for this episode.
Right. So when you think of all of the things that you like at Disney, there are precision engineering and mechanics that are underneath those things.
That's true.
And that is Broggie. Like, he was that person. He was the person that was putting together the mechanics of a lot of those things.
You hear about the people that did the voices or did the costumes because those are so visceral. Those are something that we can sense directly.
Yeah.
But you don't think about, they don't want you to see the magic underneath because it's supposed to be magic.
Right.
So that makes sense that he was never put forth as, to get the credit he probably deserved.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because it's supposed to be magic. It's supposed to be real. Those birds are talking.
Right. And
those ships are actual submarines. We're not supposed to think about the effects put into it.
And that's what he was doing. So I want to start out. There was a really interesting article written by Bob Gurr, fellow Imagineer. He started in 1954 at Disney. Bob Gurr did.
Can you imagine joining the Walt Disney Company in 1954?
That's a heck of a year.
Woo!
Like, you're like, okay, I'm coming on, and
we're opening. Running.
Yeah, and we're opening up Disneyland next year.
By the way, we're doing something no one's ever conceived of before. Come on in.
So Bob Gurr in 1954, he received a call from Roger Broggie Sr., marking the beginning of a 20-year association between him and Broggie. Broggie at Disney some people called him the Prince of Darkness. Yeah, the Prince of Darkness at Disneyland.
I feel like I'm gonna like this guy.
Yeah, exactly. He's hilarious, and I love him. And he was loyal through and through to Disney. He was a man of few words, but despite his reserved...
Talk less, smile more.
Exactly. I love that, yes. Despite his reserved demeanor, Gurr discovered a different side of him, going with him on business trips where he became like a nonstop talker on certain things and just surprised him in a lot of ways. It kind of seemed like that when Broggie was, I guess you would say on stage or whatever it is at the parks or something like that, or at work, he was immediately seen it in one way and seen and kind of opened up in other ways when he was outside of there. So
like when you get drunk at an office Christmas party.
Something like that.
Never been to an office Christmas party. I've just seen it in movies.
So this is from Bob Gurr talking here. Shortly after I began making design sketches at home for Disneyland's Autopia car, I received an early Saturday morning call. Gurr, do you draft? Sleepily, Bob Gurr said, yes. Broggie said, come over now, quick. Like, that was like his first interaction.
It's very Batman-esque.
Yeah.
Very like succinct and mysterious.
Yeah. And I think that when you think of somebody like this, you have to have these people that are mechanically minded individuals that are creative in their own ways. Like, how do you make a bird talk or sing or something like that, right? And there's the outside of that, like making it do those things and making it look nice. But the inside of that is Broggie feeling that out, figuring it out with audio animatronics on, that and pirates and all these other things too. So he was obviously a man of a few words, with a few exceptions. And Gurr also describes him, and this is me quoting here, he had very little in the way of personality, a very brief manner of speaking, and a somewhat cold, formal manner, typically dressed in business attire. And it talks about here, this is what I later learned that he was known as the Prince of Darkness at Disneyland. But everyone there at the studio seemed used to his style and the way he was, but apparently there were some very funny interactions when people were visiting the studio. So one thing that he pointed out, that Gurr pointed out, one time a very outgoing automotive parts salesman greeted Roger with a cheery "hello," and Roger just stared back at him expressionless and walked away, it sounds like. And then the salesman was like, something I said, and everybody was like, no, that's just kind of the way he is. So but he talks about like going and kind of getting outside of the parks and such with him, going outside of the studio, running errands and things like that. And he was a nonstop talker with Bob Gurr. And people came back, and he was obviously very young in his career. It's like, that's not a thing. He's not like that. But obviously, him and Bob Gurr had a relationship there. So after Roger retired, Bob Gurr went to pay him a visit when he was living in Carmel, California, and he was shocked to find him wearing Levi jeans and puttering around in his vegetable garden, and he said he just couldn't believe his eyes because it was just something he had never saw before. And he's like, hey, Mary's cooking squid. We'll drink a bottle of my best Chardonnay. And they have a chummy time and go rolling around in Gurr's Rolls Royce.
See, I'm now, after that whole Prince of Darkness stuff, I'm just picturing him, anyone who's seen the IT Crowd, Noel Fielding's character in that show, where he is just kind of a goth gremlin in the closet that occasionally appears. That's what I'm picturing now. I don't think he had the goth makeup, but...
Yeah, so I kind of wanted to start out talking about Roger Broggie with.
But he drinks Chardonnay.
Yeah,
So I can respect that.
With kind of like the idea of the personality and who he was, which I think really just kind of goes together with his, like, what Disney needed to get things done mechanically and behind the skins of these things. You know, the skin of a train or an audio animatronic or a ride or whatever.
Because you need someone who's going to just put their head down and do the work. You don't need someone to sell. You don't need someone to judge. You need them to just think through it and make it physically happen.
Yeah. And that was him. So he started out, so we'll talk a little bit about his early career at Disney and his life a little bit before that. So he was born in Pittsfield, Massachusetts, and graduated in 1927, received a vocational machine shop training. In 1932, he worked for other companies. He worked for Technicolor and things like that, and had moved to California before working for Disney, and was working for places like Technicolor. But another interesting one that I had read about him too is he actually worked with Charlie Chaplin.
Oh.
Yeah. So he was
effects?
On movies and effects. So you're going to see that before Disneyland, there's Disney before Disneyland, and then there's Disneyland and on, and the parks and things like that just changed that whole company, right? So the Imagineers, or whoever it is, before they were Imagineers, they were part of WEDS or whatever, or MAPO, or these things like that. Different things that are now kind of all put together into Imagineering, but they were working on things like his early career. He was hired on to work on the installation of the multiplane camera in animation.
Oh, huge.
Yeah, huge thing.
Exciting.
So all these creative and smart people were working on things to do with animation, working on things to do with movies. And that's where he started, was working on the multiplane camera, and worked with iWorks, who I'm sure we'll talk about at some point too. And worked on various projects like the development of rear screen special effects. He worked on camera cranes and high-speed optical printers and all this stuff, stuff that's not seen, like you like, again, this is kind of like the whole thing with him is things that are like, oh yeah, like that's really important. You have to have those things. But it's a mechanically minded person like him that you really needed for that. We're going to talk a little bit about the Carrollwood Pacific Railroad.
First Walt Disney Railroad.
All right, let's go. So he had a machine shop at Disney, and was in charge of things, come 1950-ish, was kind of seen as the head of the engineering, and that's part of Disney. That machine shop, he actually became a bit of an apprenticeship ground for Walt Disney himself.
What?
So you talked about and know that Walt became very interested in, and had always been interested in, railroads, trains, all that jazz. Bringing him into the shop and actually getting him to become a machinist, Walt become a machinist himself. So
Put your boss to work.
So
challenge.
So he was, Broggie was leading the creation of the Carrollwood Pacific Railroad, and I have a quote here. So, early most mornings, Walt would stop by and check on the progress of things there. Before long, he told Roger, hey, I don't want to interfere with what the boys are doing, but I don't think it's fair that they're having all the fun. I'd like to help too. So the next day, Walt walked in and saw an open workbench with a sign over it that read Walt's Workplace.
Oh.
Walt spent time as much time as he could learning how to use the various machines and tools in that shop. The machine shop guys were all helping him, Roger, of course, being one of them. Later, Roger said, I guess we made a pretty good apprentice machinist out of him. He surprised all of us in many ways. He had a high aptitude for machine work. So Walt's love of trains meant that he wanted to get his hands dirty and learn how to do things.
Love it.
He ended up making, I think, for the Carolwood Pacific, one of the lamps or something like that on it. And that was something that Walt himself had made.
Oh, that's awesome.
And that's because he got to get his hands on.
He had his own station.
Yeah, being a machinist and all this. So, so later, and we've got up here, we're going to start talking about some of the other projects that he worked in. But we made today on YouTube. Make sure that you go check out our YouTube video where we learned to make the Nautilus, a drink.
It's delicious.
It is very good. Cheers.
We forgot the bitters, but that's all right because it was good anyway.
It did taste really good. So we forgot the bitters, but the 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea and some of the other projects coming up before the opening of Disneyland. This is like a real integral part of the history of Disney, and the development of what was called Project Little Man. Kicking things, breaking things. Project Little Man. Roger was involved in an early audio animatronic technology. His work on Project Little Man paved the way for animatronic figures that were later.
Was that the Buddy Ebsen dancer?
It is actually a Confucius figure that was going to be used at a Chinese restaurant or something like that was never opened. So, but the beginning of that, and it was going to be small, and there was a lot of strings and things like that needed to be, hidden, but that technology, how things were working there, moved into the development of audio animatronics as we know it, and Abraham Lincoln and all that jazz too.
Abraham Lincoln and all that jazz.
Abraham Lincoln.
Never been said before ever.
But the Abraham Lincoln,
History of Mr. Lincoln.
Yeah, exactly. At Disneyland and the World Fair and all that jazz. Leading into that, he was working on 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea.
The movie.
Not
the ride.
And had developed a very famous scene in there where the squid arms and everything are like dragging down the Nautilus and stuff like that. You think about like the engineering and everything that needs to go into that. But shortly after shooting of that film wrapped, Walt approached him about working at Disneyland. Hey, we need to get started building the railroad for the park. Do you think our boys here at the studio can do it? And Walt asking Roger. Roger's short answer, sure. Yeah, we can do that. More or less, I think that they had a lot of the designs and things like that working on the Carolwood Pacific and all these things. They just need to make it bigger, right?
That's as simple as it is, I'm sure. Just make it bigger.
But I think if Walt Disney walks up to you and says, hey...
You say yes.
Yeah, you're just going to say...
Whatever. Within reason.
So Roger, we're moving on a bit, talking about Disneyland now. Most of what Roger had been working on before had been, projects like the Carolwood Pacific, things in movies, special effects, whatever, right? Now, these skills and things that he's so skilled at are being used to help build Disneyland. And Roger played a crucial role in Disneyland's construction and designing things like the locomotives, the passenger cars, and his contributions extended on to the Fantasyland vehicles. Now,
I'm sure that was restoring the locomotives because they were existing steam engines, right?
Right. There was a lot of that too. Yep, and all of that. But when it comes to like some of like the Fantasyland rides and things like that, there was a company. A lot of that was developed by a company named Aero Development. But even if you're developing and making those rides, they have to be kind of unique to Disneyland. So Roger and other machinists were needed to iron out like some of the kinks and whatnot.
Oh, sure.
With those ride systems.
If you're a company, you're going to sell to anyone who's buying. You can't just sell to Disney. So you might have something that's traveling at fairs or at regular amusement parks, but Disney had to step theirs up to be different.
Right.
Okay.
So one of the things too that he was working on is and bringing in UB iWorks again here. He worked with UB iWorks on the Cinerama 360 cameras. So like when you see like at developed at Epcot, that circle vision, early versions of that were worked on with iWorks and Roger Broggie.
Interesting. We're just thinking about what difficulty I have with my cell phone's panoramic camera view. That's a lot more challenging than it appears.
Yeah.
Especially at the time, I'm sure.
Oh yeah, no, it's crazy. Moving on here, innovations into audio animatronics, which is a big thing, of course. Roger's team enhanced audio animatronic figures, working closely with Imagineers on the technical feasibility of things like Great Moments with Mr. Lincoln, Pirates of the Caribbean, and the Tiki Room. So Roger Broggie helped work on the mechanics of each pirate and kind of oversaw that project after Walt's passing. So as Walt and other Imagineers worked to develop new attractions, they'd bounce their ideas off Roger to see if they were technically feasible. Which is like...
But if you can dream it, you can do it.
Roger would say if you could do that, more or less. Like, that's pretty much
that
how...
That sounds about right.
And you had to have someone like that, and that
You
was
did.
Roger.
Yeah.
Like, hey, can we make...
It would be hard to find the personality to say no to Walt.
Mm-hmm.
But it sounds like this would be the guy.
Yeah, and it would just be like they would brainstorm their steam-up sessions or whatever they would call them, would be the thing like, hey, Roger, we want to make birds sing and dance or sing songs or whatever it is. Like, what do you need?
His response is sure.
Sure, that's doable. Hey, Roger,
And it was doable.
Can we bring something crazy to... No, probably not. It costs too much. It's too much work or something like that, I'm sure, was kind of the way that was handled. So, but I like the idea that was kind of... He was that guy they brought ideas to, and, hey, do you think we could do this? And he would talk about the reasons why you could or couldn't, or what the technical challenges would be for that. So according to another Imagineer, Bill Martin, he said, as far as audio animatronics, the person who tells them it can't work is Roger Broggie. So moving on to, I know I mentioned when we were talking about trains, the monorail.
Yeah.
Right? Monorail worked specifically with Bob Gurr on the monorail. Roger, along with Bob Gurr, successfully built Disneyland's first monorail system in 1959. They were incorporating another company named Alweg. I don't know if I'm saying that correctly or not. Their technology. More or less, Roger and Bob had traveled to Cologne, Germany, and talked to them about building this monorail. Now, when they got there, they were facing some time constraints and all that. Talked about the grand opening of things with the monorail in 1959, but talking about how they had built the previous trains and things like that. They're like, I think that you guys could probably just build this yourself. We're going to help and assist with blueprints and consultants, but your engineers and all those people can probably just make this monorail system work.
If they got it from this company in Germany, how do you get the products to California?
Right.
How do you get, that's a whole nother layer of cost and complications.
Time and money and everything.
Versus can you just build it from where you are?
Right. So more or less they talked about their...
Don't they still get monorail cars from Germany though?
I don't know.
I feel like when there was a monorail update, I feel like I saw something about them coming from Germany.
Could be, yeah.
I might have made that up. I don't think so.
So we talk about his kind of moving on, and I'm kind of jumping around a little bit here, but his legacy can be felt from before Disneyland and 1939 multi-plane camera, which is just a big part of Disney. All the way to the opening of Epcot. He consulted with the opening of Epcot, in the 70s. But Roger's involvement extended to the building of the Magic Kingdom Railroad. So to acquire those locomotives for the Magic Kingdom, Roger set out for Mexico, learning of a number of trains that were recently put out of use. So this whole plan was almost completely derailed due to Mexican regulation prohibiting the sale of these sort of things. But however, Disney was able to exploit a loophole that allowed it, since they were originally made in the U.S. So they were made in the U.S.
They went to Mexico.
Now they're coming back to the U.S., so they exploited some sort of loophole to get them back into the U.S. So if they were made in Mexico, it apparently would have been much more difficult or impossible to get those trains here.
Interesting.
Yeah. So Broggie ended up retiring in 1975. He
started in 54?
39.
39,
yeah.
Okay.
39. And he retired in 75 and said,
full career.
Walt left me about 10 years of work when he died.
Oh.
Once it was done, I was ready to retire.
Oh.
Yeah.
That's sweet.
Yeah. So he stuck around.
Or depressing, I'm not sure.
Yeah. He was a company guy. He was someone who was there, believed in the whole thing. Someone who has been there obviously from 1939 to 1975, has a lot of opportunity early in his career, develops, a strong, career at a company, and is seen as the head of departments when it comes to mechanical engineering and things like that. Like, that's a big deal.
I wonder how many people he had to pass his knowledge on to.
Oh my gosh.
Because it's that whole, like, someone leaves your work, how is that going to be backed up? That's very important. But it sounds like he was so vital. I bet that backup had to be shared amongst multiple people.
Oh yeah. No, it definitely had to be shared among multiple people, but it also was like one of those things too that, like, it seemed like he was so specialized in that one particular thing that someone else at that company would definitely need to know how to make an audio animatronic work or something like that. That's maybe more on the creative side of things. But having a little bit of, like you're saying, that knowledge that will stick with them forever, coming from Broggie is...
But Broggie loved trains, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that
was a big deal. So, like, the whole Carrollwood Pacific Railroad, helping build those small cars at Disneyland, eventually becoming to, the railway in the backyard of Walt Disney, all very big part of that was obviously Broggie being able to bring that to fruition. So talk a little bit about his legacy and tributes. The number 3 car at the Magic Kingdom at Walt Disney World is named the Roger E. Broggie, and there's a window at Disneyland's Main Street honoring him as well. He was a Disney legend and was named a Disney legend in 1990, and bringing back my buddy here, chairman at the time, Michael Eisner, acknowledged that without Roger, Disneyland would not have happened.
Wow.
Roger retired, obviously, in 75, which we talked about, over 35 years at the company.
So he got his train car opening at Walt Disney World in 1972, 3 years before he retired. He got a train named after him while he was still there.
That's totally rad.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, some additional things I wanted to bring up here. So, that was 1991 is when he passed, and he was 83 years old. And yeah, so that's pretty much, Mr. Broggie here. Big deal when it comes to
Prince of Darkness.
The Prince of Darkness, the mechanical mind and engineer.
I think it would take a Prince of Darkness to say no to Walt Disney's face and still work there for another 30 years.
I doubt that it happened very often.
Probably not. But I'm sure there were some ideas thrown at the wall that were impossible with the technology of the time.
Well, like it's being said,
trackless ride vehicles, they could not have done that in the 50s.
So
there's no way.
I thought I had it on here. I don't think I see it on here. So one of the other big things that he worked on was the Omnimover. So the Omnimover ride system being used on...
It was like the People Mover?
No. So the Omnimover would be like the at Haunted Mansion.
Oh,
where it's a continuous sort of movement going through. Yep, and being able to point the view of the guest.
Spaceship Earth.
Things like that. All that Omnimover stuff was worked on and was a big part. Another huge part of his career was
those are
that.
huge. They're comfortable. It loads quickly.
Yeah.
Adjust the view based on what you're supposed to be looking at.
Oh, I skipped over it because it was right after the Cinerama / circle view camera, 360 view camera here. But the Omnimover ride system was another big part of everything that he worked on at Disneyland, and obviously the Omnimover system still being used on new attractions today. So, yeah.
One of my favorite things at the Haunted Mansion is when I get stopped when I'm leaning backwards in that car. Going towards the graveyard. I don't know why I enjoy that sensation, but I do. I like when you're stopped leaning backwards and you can just sit back, enjoy the music, maybe a little bit of scared dog next to you.
Right.
You get stopped at the right spot. I think it's fun.
Just briefly, I wanted to mention at the end of this, too, is Michael Broggie. His son was also an Imagineer, did a lot of things. I'm sure we could bring him up on a separate, for some of the work that he did at Disney World, Disneyland as an Imagineer. Could bring him up on something else. But he is also a co-founder of what is called the Carolwood Society and the Carolwood Foundation. And that foundation operates Walt Disney's Carolwood Barn and other Disney-related exhibits within the Los Angeles Live Steamers Railroad Museum in Griffith Park. So big Disney railroad nerds, and that society is keeping all that alive, preserving those sort of things, and putting that information out there. So
I'm kind of curious whether the interest in trains is going to continue kind of past our generation. Because some of these things that there were a lot of people into back in the 50s, it was a very popular hobby. You don't hear young kids talking about trains as much as like toy trains, maybe. I'm curious if it's going to stand the test of time.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things we talked a little bit about the the resurgence, reemergence, whatever the word is for that, of trains and these
for actual logistical functional purposes.
Yeah, coming back. So I think that's part of that, keeping that alive, keeping places like the Carolwood Society, keeping that sort of thing alive too, and Disney. I mean, I'm sure they're
all over Disney.
Yeah, I'm sure
That's
there's
true.
plenty of kids that are like, "Whoa, look at that train!" You know, I'm kind of like that. I'm the kid saying, "Whoa, look at that train." So, but that's Broggie for you.
All right, the Dark Prince.
The Dark Prince.
Dark Prince of Disneyland.
Yeah, I love that.
Thank you for the darkness, Kyle.
Yeah, I don't know. I feel like that he was just like so wholly himself that like if you weren't super comfortable around people just being themselves and being a super smart engineer type, people probably were just intimidated. I think that's what you do or call someone you're super intimidated by.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and there's, we as humans only have room for so much. And if you are that heavy in like skills and smarts, do you have any room for charisma? I don't know.
I don't know. Well, we guys hope you're enjoying this second series here at Nautilus. We're tying in, obviously, trains into Roger Broggie here. Got his start really with Disney because he liked trains.
Which, and we know Disney loved trains.
Mm-hmm.
And you know who else likes a train? Mickey Mouse.
That's right. Mickey Mouse is coming up next. He's got his Runaway Railway, and we're going to be talking a bit about that and having some fun with that.
Yeah.
See you there.